So I just had what I will call the most eye-opening interview that I've had, I think ever, honestly. I know I put out a YouTube video recently about the Musqueam decision in BC, basically like a land claim over a bunch of property in Vancouver. I'll put it up on the screen here. And, I'm kind of like trying to understand personally whether or not the whole idea that this is like a huge threat to property rights, uh, you know, with some of the information that I've presented is a real risk, or if it's sort of blown out of proportion. And I basically got answers to all of those questions. And I did kind of feel like the discussion was becoming like a bit alarmist, that it was not the interview, but sort of the discussion prior, that people, were maybe not super to be concerned that there was individual property right risk here. But I've honestly completely changed my mind on that as a result of this interview. Anyway, I'm honestly at a bit of a loss for words. So pretty dumbfounded by some of the stuff that Tom Isaac, who a lot of you, my commenters, recommended that I have a conversation about the Indigenous land rights with. I'm just gonna not even waste any more time with the introduction and just get right to the interview, because you really got to hear what he has to say. So let's get into it. Everybody keeps mentioning your name, and then I have to speak with you about it. And I've spoken with a couple of other experts across the country in this regard, but it keeps coming back to you. So I'm curious if you could just start us off with sort of an introduction of who you are and what you do, and what kind of brings you to the topic that we're going to be discussing today.
Well, thanks. My name's Tom Isaac. I'm a lawyer. I chair my firm, Castle's National Aboriginal Law Group. I co-chair our major projects team nationally. I've practiced in the area of Aboriginal law my entire career. I've worked in the public service, used to be chief treaty negotiator in British Columbia, helped set up Nunavut back in the 90s up in the Northwest Territories. Published extensively in the area, and active in every province and territory of Canada for a long, long time. So that's
Nice.
sort of me in a nutshell.
I guess that's why everybody's recommending you. You got a storied career, and you're qualified to be talking about this stuff. So you mentioned sort of before we got on camera, and I imagine as a result of sort of your accolades in the space, that you get called on a lot to do this, but it's sort of maybe fatiguing a little bit as to whether or not we're making any progress with the discussions. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of like how you're feeling about it?
Well, you'll be the first person that's asked me that, but I'll share it with you. I mean, so I'm nonpartisan. I'm a proud Canadian. I'm not anti-reconciliation. I actually work for Indigenous governments sometimes as well. But it's quite clear, certainly in British Columbia, that where we're heading is not a good place. We've got a failed economy, and what's really feeling like a failed society. Whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, we're leaving a lot of folks behind. It's quite bleak here right now in British Columbia. And so, I feel like I'm one of the few people really talking about the macro issues about where we're heading. And it's frustrating. I do have a day job. I run a business. I try to provide good legal services to our clients. And again, I'm very proud of that work, but it's frustrating that I don't understand why people don't understand or care more about where we're going as a society, that, we need a very robust economy if we're serious about reconciliation.
Yeah.
We can't leave non-Indigenous people behind.
Right.
We can't be doing secret agreements. We can't be, one of the things I've been saying now is stop the platitudes. I mean, I act for Indigenous governments too. And, some of them listening will know, or watching will know what I'm talking about, but platitudes for the sake of platitudes. And this issue does not lend itself well to that. By this issue, I mean the Aboriginal rights issue, Aboriginal title issue. It's, I'm happy to try to help, but I don't see the cavalry coming, to talk about what the future holds for our country, for the province.
Has that surprised you about it? Like, with all of the things that have happened in the news, like, did you think that it would get more attention? I mean, I did two of the videos that I did on this earlier got 60, 70,000 views. And then they've kind of been, I don't know if it's just with issues, like people just get exhausted or fatigued by the constant headlines. And the first one, I think the Cowichan decision is maybe one of the most notable ones. And then it keeps, people are kind of just okay, well, what am I watching this for at this point? But have you been surprised by the lack of interest in it?
Look, I think you're right on it there. And I'm getting fatigued.
Yeah, same.
This is all I do.
Yeah.
And, I've had a couple sleepless nights, I'm usually good at compartmentalizing, but I'm very, very concerned about where we're going. The Musqueam Agreement, the fact that the government of Canada felt so comfortable at this particular point in time to throw the kerosene on the fire that it did. Again, this isn't about right or wrong. I think as a matter of fact, it's kerosene on the fire. You go, why? And there's no apparent reason for it. I heard the minister go, well, we want a basis to talk more. Yeah, well, there's a lot of other ways you can have a basis to talk more without adding more uncertainty that we just don't need right now. And it's exasperating. I don't think it really matters what side of the fence you fall on.
Right.
It's really exasperating the discussion. Reconciliation ought to be very serious business. And to say that, and then not to consult with the public, not to consult with other First Nations, we're finding out.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the agreement is quite frankly, shocking. It doesn't do it. But what I would say to you is that I think most Canadians, and I have the honor of working across the country, we're active everywhere. Most Canadians don't make the link between the Musqueam Agreement, the Haida Agreement, the Cowichan decision, the UNDRIP legislation, and their crappy healthcare.
Yeah. Interesting.
They don't make the link. They don't make the link between the lack of public government leadership on these issues and the fact that we don't have a good rail system in our country, or that the Montreal airport is still in the shape that it's in, and it shouldn't be. We should have a world-class airport. And you might go, Tom, why are you talking about that? We're here to... We've had a plummeting of home values. Now, you're the expert, and you've had experts on about this. I just happen to own 3 properties in BC.
Well, you feel it.
Let me tell you, the market is taking a significant hit. I am not an expert. I'm speaking anecdotally from my own personal experience, but, and I want to be clear, I'm not blaming Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
I don't blame the Musqueam for the Musqueam Agreement.
Right.
It's
capitalism, really.
These are all self-inflicted wounds.
Yeah.
And so, I don't understand at what point do Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, have enough pain where they go, enough is enough. We have to have a game plan. We have to have a vision. Let's look at BC just in particular. We have to have a vision for British Columbia so that non-Indigenous British Columbians aren't left behind. And listen to this one, and Indigenous British Columbians are not being left behind. Because remember, for every one deal that's being done that we're all having trouble with and challenges with, there's a whole bunch of folks, Indigenous folks in this province, that are being left behind as well.
Yeah.
It's because we can't afford it and we don't have a game plan. So I don't know when that time is. I'm coming to the conclusion that we have too high of a pain tolerance in this country. And I'm not hopeful right now. I'm not. I think the fact that the federal government felt comfortable enough to do what it did on Musqueam secretly, knowing it, they had to know that this would be really feeding a fire that need not be fed right now. I'm without words for it.
Right. Yeah. I think about this almost exclusively from a property rights lens, and it's something I never thought I'd be talking about because, I never thought the reconciliation movement would ever intersect with real estate. And I always wonder, you framed it, you give Canadians a lot more credit than I do, or at least I think a lot of people in my comments and people I hear in the dialogue, I think a lot of people interpret Canadians as weak, and that they've bent for a lot of things. They're willing to take a lot of abuse over the last several years, and as a result of things that the government has done.
Yeah.
And that, but I think the way that you framed it as pain tolerance is actually probably the right way to be thinking about it. And I hadn't really considered we're actually far tougher and willing to subject ourselves to more pain than I guess my thought and my sort of question and my interest around this thing is property rights where the buck ends up stopping. Like if there's one thing that I think Canadians are really, really obsessed with, like more than anything, it is the Canadian dream of homeownership and their right to own property. And we can go all the way back to like, do we even have charter rights to own property and stuff like that? But do you think that could be like the catalyst?
Let me put it to you that it ought to be.
Yeah.
And I would say that we're having discussions now in the past 6 or 7 months that I've not heard in my entire career.
Right.
Now, I've been ringing the bell in British Columbia for decades about where's the game plan. This is unaffordable. It's clear the bridge is out. We all know the bridge is out.
Mm-hmm.
You know that analogy, right? We know the train is going to run out of track. It's painfully clear. It's not debatable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what I would say, I like the way you framed it actually about Canadians, but what I would say to everyone listening and watching is it's completely unnecessary.
Right.
We don't need to suffer. We can be good people, reconcile with our Indigenous friends and colleagues, have a robust economy, and have a first world healthcare, education, transportation systems. We choose not to.
Yeah.
And I believe that. I've been doing this long enough. I've been on this earth long enough that I'm very confident in what I'm saying. That Canadians are clever enough and smart enough and civil enough that we could do it if we insisted on more, but we don't. So, Dad, I talk about this and people sometimes go, well, why is he talking about healthcare and that when he's supposed to be talking about Aboriginal? Isn't he an Aboriginal law guy? I am, but not enough people make the link between like this Musqueam agreement signed and the uncertainty and Cowichan and all the stuff about UNDRIP, which we can talk about UNDRIP if you want, and the truth about UNDRIP. But I link that to 5-year wait lists for surgery in BC for some people. 5 years. That's not even third world. I mean, there are third world countries you can get surgery in quicker than British Columbia right now. Nobody says anything.
Yeah.
I just drove up. I dropped my kid off at the airport the other day. He was going back to school. I drove up Granville Street. If you know Vancouver, it's a major thoroughfare. I almost broke the front axle of my vehicle. And you're like, our road system, our ferry system, our airport, because we don't have enough of a robust economy. But what Canadians need to understand is that it's self-inflicted.
Yeah.
Until we decide to get out of our way, we're going to get worse and worse healthcare. We're going to get worse and worse education. And our public governments, and again, in BC right now, it's really, really quite bleak. And so I don't know how to change that. It's above my pay grade, as they say. I'm a lawyer. Mm-hmm. I live in my little bubble in some ways. If I get sick, I'm not in BC, right? I'm in California. I'm in Japan or something probably is my reality. Yeah. But it's sad. I mean, I love my country, right? And I'm proud of Canada, but I think we've really lost our way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can be proud of something and worried about it as well.
Yes.
And
thank you.
I think, it's interesting what you said about like it being self-inflicted. And then I think we'll try and zoom in a bit more on like the actual, this legislation, because you understand it so well. And I really want to pick your brain on it. But, I think about this a lot with young people, and like there's been a pretty strong like movement towards the conservative movement on among young people, but young people tend like they didn't show up at the polls, and so when I say when I hear self-inflicted, I think completely like we can all yell and scream and say that we feel a certain way and we don't like the government on social media or whatever it is. And like again, I'm a nonpartisan individual in all of my content as well, but I think that young people really need to, like you can say, oh, the baby boomers chose the outcome of the election. Well, they didn't have the exclusive power to. Like, had young people showed up to vote at the same percentage that they did, the outcome could have been different. Young people could have had it. And so I agree with you that it's self-inflicted. And I think people, the irony of sort of like the conservative movement to me is that people forget about this principle of individual responsibility, which is a core tenet of conservatism, and they're blaming others when the truth is that had young people shown up, they could have decided the outcome and the future of their country. And it really breaks my heart that because democracy dies in apathy, right?
Listen, you and I are very much aligned on that point.
Yeah.
And there is something, and again, way above my pay grade. I'm not a child psychologist, and I have 2 boys that are now young adults. but there is something going on with the younger generation.
Yeah.
And they are looking at the world going, this is craziness, what's going on. And I've asked about their friends. I've been doing my own little sort of social study on this. And so I think you hit the nail on the head. But my message really is this is all self-inflicted. We can walk and chew gum if we want to in this country, but and we all feel it. If you ask Canadians, and again, coast to coast, across party lines, are things better today than they were 5 years, 10 years? This is a nonpartisan comment.
Yeah.
We all know that our standard of living has fallen significantly, depending on where you're at in the country, more ways than one. But understand there are pockets of this country that are oblivious to it. Everything's just great. And we're just moving on. And it's like, I like what I hear from the federal government, for example, right now, major projects. I do. I think what the Prime Minister is doing, again, I'm nonpartisan, I'll just say it.
But I think they observe the same brokenness that you're describing, in such that they brand it as the new Liberal government. Like, they want to make a very clear distinction that they're not the old one that caused that problem.
The Musqueam agreement. And then you're left with this. How can that be the same government?
Right.
Do they understand that agreement will get in the way of building projects if they live up to the agreement?
Yeah.
If they don't live up to the agreement, well, I guess you can build whatever you want.
Right.
So I don't understand what's going on there. And it's that uncertainty that kills us.
Yeah. So for people who are trying to get a grasp for this, like, give me 30,000 foot view of, like, if I'm new to this subject, what's everything I need to know about sort of the decisions that have happened so far, the differences between the types of layers here. So, like, Aboriginal title, treaty rights, and like how this interacts with private property rights.
Yeah. So we've had a court decision and we've had some agreements signed by the government of BC and then ultimately the government of Canada that say that First Nations can have Aboriginal title over private land. And somehow the First Nation can reissue title or they can coexist. That is not consistent with Canadian law. Okay? I just want to say it. I want to be really clear. There is no debate on what I'm about to say in terms of what the Supreme Court of Canada, to date, they may change their mind, but to date, here's what Aboriginal title is. It's an Aboriginal right. It's protected by the Constitution. Remember, everybody, that Canada voluntarily amended its Constitution in 1982. Nobody had a gun to our head. We did it to ourselves. We amended our Constitution. Aboriginal title is the exclusive right to land, even over and above the government, such that, and you'll know this in terms of your focus and the folks listening and watching, can you imagine, this is, as far as I'm aware, the only Western economy where this has been stated about private land. The Crown, the government, retains no beneficial interest. Unheard of in the common law.
Right.
No beneficial. The Crown, the government can't extract any benefit from land held by title. Even the government must ask for consent to get onto that land unless it decides to infringe. We can talk about infringement because the law is really clear that government can infringe title. None of these rights are absolute, everyone. The government has the ability to approve projects and build stuff if they want to. They choose another path in many instances. So, and I'm now quoting directly what the Supreme Court of Canada said, quote, "It is no longer Crown land," end quote. So when you hear courts and agreements saying, well, we'll acknowledge title, that's a big deal. That means it's an exclusive right to land. Now, let me tell you about one of the oldest legal principles in Canada. You ready for this one? We don't have much in this country older than 200 years. I'm about to tell everyone something that's older than 200 years. And it was first enunciated in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And that is that First Nations can't give up their interest in land, however they held it at the time. We could have a debate, and look, I get it that there's some wiggle room here about grayness about what they held it by, but the core legal concept is still the law today. And what's that legal concept? They can't give their interest in their land to anyone but whom? The government.
Okay.
So all this business of, well, the government will come in and negotiate. This is what we hear of the Cowichan. I said, no, there's nothing in the case law that says that. They either have title or they don't. And if they have title, it's their land. All this business of, well, you'll just pay your taxes to a different. You'll get rights of occupation. Well, that's not indefeasible title. from a democratically elected government that's broad-based. That is, everyone has a right to vote. Okay? So this is all smoke and mirrors on this stuff. And so right now the law is that they can't coexist, in my view. It's quite clear. And if I may, can I say one final point? Because I
Yeah,
think the
absolutely.
listeners
I
of
could
yours
just
will
listen for the whole time. So
well, listen to this now. Some of you will have heard of the Delgamuukw decision, 1997. There's been about 4 big Aboriginal title decisions from the highest court in Canada, Supreme Court of Canada. I'm going to focus on 2. The 2 leading ones, and I think everyone would agree with me that it's Delgamuukw in 1997 and Chilcotin or Chilcotin in 2014. Those are 2 big ones. Delgamuukw paragraph 165 is one of the few paragraphs that the Supreme Court of Canada quoted out of Delgamuukw in the Chilcotin decision in 2014. Why am I telling you this? Because it's really important. They actually quoted it verbatim again. Everyone ready? Here we go. Paragraph 165. This is almost verbatim. The list of compelling objectives that can justify a Crown of infringement of Aboriginal title is, quote, fairly broad, end quote. Now let's stop there. So remember I said Aboriginal title is everything. Screw it, you get the land. But it's not absolute. None of these rights are absolute. The Crown can infringe where appropriate. And I want to be clear to all my Indigenous friends listening, I'm not talking about a free-for-all. There are tests that need to, but the government can do it. The court has reiterated this. So the court says, hey, the list of objectives that can justify an infringement of Aboriginal title, the highest form of Aboriginal rights, fairly broad. Then they give a list of examples. Ready? Quote, and these are verbatim, everyone. Mining, forestry, general economic development, the generation of hydroelectricity. I'm not joking, by the way. These are, ready for the next one? The building of infrastructure. Like, man, just the building of infrastructure. And then my favorite, the settlement of foreign populations. Now, they say that. They don't go on. But what's that? I don't have to tell any of your, that's homesteading, which is the granting of fee simple interest. Not a government likes talking about that. And then you go, Tom, why not? I don't know. So there's the law, everybody. So I get asked all the time, one last thing, I get asked all the time, Tom, can government still approve projects? Yeah, absolutely. I'd be hard pressed to give you a project that I know of in recent history that can't be fully approved by a government to be built. Now, governments have to consult. They have to behave honorably, but it's these contractual agreements where they voluntarily impose other standards that are a problem. And they did that in the Musqueam agreement. And happy to talk about that if you like.
yeah, so a lot to unpack here.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No, that's okay. No, yeah, I
like
appreciate it.
people
Yeah.
to hear what those are the court's words.
So there's three sort of like thoughts that I have around that, and I'll frame it in a question that might be easy to answer. What is the biggest like risk of this? This risk of this becoming like catastrophically bad, or creating that catalyzing moment where people do kind of wake up about this matter. Out of everything that you just mentioned, is it one on the tax side when you say like they could collect taxation without representation? 2, is it a resource project maybe that gets obstructed or like there's a massive issue with business interests? Or 3, is there actually you and I at risk of losing our private property, fee simple ownership of a home? Like, and those are kind of the 3 categories that
all
sort of
3 of those
are
real right now in BC.
Crazy.
That's happening. So if you're on the 800 acres on the Cowichan and you happen to be one of those poor landowners, and again, my heart breaks for those people. They have to live with this. This is their reality today. Can you imagine having your house with a cloud over your indefeasible title and trying to sell that house now?
Completely illiquid now. Like nobody's going to buy that. Lenders aren't even touched. Like there's instances where lenders,
that is real today.
It's funny because they're like, oh, it's not an issue, but then they're also like, we're going to backstop all these mortgages. It's like, well, don't you not need to?
Yeah. And listen, That's like even on the Musqueam agreement, the federal minister and Musqueam have both said private property is not included. I want your listeners to hear me very carefully on this. That's not true. Okay? It's not true. The agreement, the map of the Musqueam territory includes Vancouver Harbor, Stanley Park, all like big hunk of West Vancouver. That's where I live. North Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, and there's a lot of private property involved there. There is no express exclusion in the agreement. If they wanted to exclude, like again, I don't think you have to be too bright, by the way, to figure this stuff out. If you wanted to exclude private property, what would you do? Put in the agreement, hey, private property is not included here. So they got to stop feeding us the lines like we're stupid. We're not stupid. So there's that one. And then the other one that the Musqueam have said, and again, I don't blame the Musqueam for the agreement, by the way. This is all in Canada, just to be very, very clear.
I agree. So I was just gonna say, I think well, like people who seem to be most like uncomfortable with this is like people who I would say, believe in sort of like a free market capitalist society. And I mean, you cannot blame someone for exploiting a counterparty and capitalizing. Like they're being excellent at capitalism.
I'm being critical of their description of the agreement because it's inaccurate. Okay.
Right.
So that's fair game. But I'm not going to criticize them. I didn't criticize the Haida Nation.
They got a great deal.
I didn't criticize the Cowichan. I've criticized some of their explanations about the decision, which are inaccurate. But Musqueam also said, well, it only includes federal lands. I want your listeners to hear me. That's not accurate. There is no delineation of federal or provincial lands. I mean, so again, why the government of Canada would do that right now. So you ran through your 3 buckets. I would say all of those are live today. And, projects are facing uphill battles. We are approving projects, but at great public cost that's not equitable. I'll say it, not equitable, not fair, and doesn't have a macroeconomic plan of, look, if you start sharing revenue with First Nations, which by the way, I'm in favor of, I think there's models, but if you don't have a macroeconomic plan supporting that going, hey, every dollar that isn't going into the pot, and I don't have to tell you or most of you guys are going to be way more sophisticated on this stuff than me. You don't have to be too bright, I don't think, to figure out that, hey, if you're used to collecting $10 in revenue and you're not going to share half of it, $5 with someone else, you need to make up for the $5. Like if you're going to keep your health care and everything just at the same basic levels that they're at now, which isn't very good, but that's another story. They don't. So that would mean you'd have to double the number of mines that you're producing. Like this isn't rocket science. So what's our game plan then for doubling the number of mines that we're producing? And how does that fit into our environmental strategy? So until we get a game plan and we're not leaving First Nations and Métis behind in this province, and believe it or not, we're doing that too. So, and this is all because we don't have a game plan and we've got election cycle thinking on these issues. And these issues do not, I've been saying this for decades. I apologize if I sound like a broken record, but these issues do not lend themselves well to election cycle thinking at all. And so we need to get out of that mode. I don't know if our public governments are capable of doing it based on this most recent Musqueam agreement, which seems like a deliberately provocative move. That's what it looks like. It's so in all of our faces that you've got to think Canada did this deliberately. Why? I don't know.
And what are people actually afraid of here? Because I think I think the uncertainty is what kills most people.
Yes.
A lot of people, I spend a lot of time trying to understand this stuff, and I still find it very difficult to understand. And so I would assume that you probably have one of the best understandings of this in the country.
Not much more in terms of why they signed that agreement. I mean, what they're trying to prove.
Yeah, less that piece, setting aside their intentions, because I don't know about any of us will ever know. I'll see if I can find somebody at the federal government to hop on and have a conversation about it, but I think that's pretty unlikely. But more like, what's a worst case scenario outcome as a result of this? Like, is it possible that people like actually lose property? Like, and you know, I
Okay,
think you work with these groups, so their likelihood of wanting to do that is probably pretty low.
understand what the Cowichan court said, that when the suspension is up the 18 months, and if we don't get a stay, the Cowichan can go to court on their 800 acres. And for those people that weren't represented that own property, the judge said the Cowichan can seek the normal remedies of possession of their land. Okay? So that's a reality today for those poor folks on the 800 acres. And so now I'm not saying the Cowichan will automatically get their land. Those folks will then have to, now imagine you're a private landowner. Now you've got to individually defend your property. Now the Cowichan said they won't do that. Okay, but they might change their mind at some point. Remember, we're dealing with a constitutional right to land. That's assuming the decision were to be upheld. So now you go into court to defend your title. So what do? The first thing you do is you pick up your title. Sorry for everyone listening, I'm holding up a blank pad of paper, but I'm pretending this is my indefeasible title, right? This is what gives me value. Well, do you know what else the Cowichan court did? Oh, they said, oh, by the way, anytime there's a finding of Aboriginal title anywhere in BC, not just on the 800 acres either, the Land Title Act doesn't apply. Now, some of your, yeah, I can tell by the look at, no, Tom, no, come on. I am telling you in 7 different paragraphs. So when I get accused of fear mongering, right, which, oh, gee, there was one sentence. No, by the way, the judge didn't invalidate the title. So the judge says, oh, I'm not invalidating those titles. I'm just going to just say that the Land Title Act doesn't apply to them. So now you go in to defend your title if you're on the 800 acres. You lift up your title, but there's nothing on it now because the court has said the Land Title Act doesn't apply, which is what grants you indefeasible title as against the world. So your next question will be, well, Tom, what do you have? The honest answer is I don't know. You have a piece of paper. You don't have the Land Title Act anymore, so you don't have indefeasible property as we know it at law. Unlike every other Western democracy on the planet, okay? You've got some sort of common law right to occupy that land, okay? And evidence that you once had indefeasible title up against a constitutional right to land held by a First Nation. So that's a reality today if Cowichan isn't overturned. Can't make that up. And I think that's an accurate description, what I just said.
So, okay, so two questions here. Well, let's start with the one that you just finished on. Is there a likelihood that it gets overturned? Like, how does this next little bit play out? Like, and what needs to happen for this to actually get to a place where people are comfortable with it?
I believe that the Supreme Court of Canada, as I explained earlier, sorry for getting so lawyerly and actually giving you a quote, but I thought thought people would like to hear that's what the court said in black, and they repeated it 14 years later, or 7 years later, excuse me. No, yeah, 14 years later, another decision. So there's 17 years later. So I do think that Cowichan won't be upheld because the economic consequences of that would be catastrophic. You cannot have a cloud on indefeasible title. I don't have to tell you or the vast majority, or if not every single one of your regular listeners and viewers, that if you have a cloud on indefeasible title, it ain't indefeasible anymore.
And does that apply?
And if it's not indefeasible, our whole economic, and this is what, can I just say one last thing?
Yeah, for sure.
Because it goes back to something you started with about the Canadian public and where we were going. I say this to renters in the Lower Mainland. People who oh, gee, I don't own a house. This doesn't affect me. Yeah, it affects you. You work in the wage economy, don't you? Yes, I do. Well, do you understand that a cornerstone that holds Western economies together, US, Japan, Europe, Canada, Australia, is the notion and concept of indefeasible title. So if you have a cloud on it, understand you are putting a cloud on your entire economy. And if anyone thinks that I am overstating this, they're nuts, because this would be catastrophic. It's never been done in recent human history where we've actually tried to play around with the market in a market economy like that.
And that's the part that I find interesting, is that like the market has clearly responded in certain ways. One, with the debt side, with the way mortgage lenders are behaving in relation to this property, and two, with the buy sell side, with the fact that there's really no bid for properties that have this cloud over them until that gets resolved. Now, I was going to ask, like, if this doesn't get upheld, and we have this issue with indefeasible title, is that only in BC because of the way that they enacted UNDRIP, or does this have the ability to spread across Canada?
Well, I suspect the court would end up, so if it's the BC Court of Appeal, it would only be law in British Columbia, right? If it goes to the Supreme Court of Canada, then the Supreme Court of Canada would rule. They may restrict their decision to BC. They may apply it nationally. We'd have to wait. We'd have to wait and see. But I do want to stress something to you. This isn't just a legal issue. We've got law today. We could have both of our public governments, the federal government and the provincial government here in this province, showing leadership today on these issues. And they're not. They contradicted themselves on the Cowichan stance with the Haida Agreement. They did the exact opposite in Haida. They said fee simple and Aboriginal title could coexist. You can't make this up. Then they went into court, I'll say snuck into court, after Cowichan comes out, but before the appeal period, when they have to file their public views on Cowichan, and had a court order to endorse the Haida Agreement and Aboriginal title on Haida Gwaii. That directly contradicts what the Cowichan decision did. I want to be very clear. That is exactly what the Cowichan decision did, yet they say the Cowichan decision's wrong. So which one is it? So how does that make you feel warm and fuzzy, right? And so it's shameful in my view. I think to let our economy get into the state that it's in, people are really suffering. And we're suffering at all different levels in terms of our level of services, legal certainty, reconciliation is suffering. Make no mistake about it. This is setting back the reconciliation agenda. And I stand by that as well.
Totally agree with you. I mean, that's like, I think that's one of the reasons why I feel like I have taken such an interest in this, is that it does feel like you can have a conversation that's beneficial to both sides, because I think that this has, like, people were really in favor, like that, the movement was going so well, and people were really in favor of anything associated with that, until it started to feel like a threat and an infringement and a lack of clarity around their own individual property rights. And I think that's, I like in the last 5 years asked myself the question so many times, like, what's it going to take for Canadians to go and get their pitchforks? And I feel like their ability to own their own home is one of the, I don't know, like it does feel like a potential catalyst.
I think you might be right. I hope you are right. It'll be good for the country. It'll be good for the economy. It'll be good for Indigenous peoples. I really believe that. And I'm allowed to say that. I'm not Indigenous, but I'm allowed to have a view. I think it will be. They may disagree with me. Some of them they are entitled to their view. I think it'll be good for the country as a whole. We need a very robust economy if we're serious about reconciliation, particularly in British Columbia. We have 204 First Nations in this province, and the Métis as well. And if we're serious about reconciliation, talk about build, baby, build. BC needs to be just having a burning hot economy. And we seem to be doing everything we can do to make sure that BC is on its knees. And it feels like we're on our knees right now. And that's thanks to our public governments.
So on that note, because I know we're short on time here, two final questions to wrap up. Number one, how did we get here? Like, how did we end up with, is it the UNDRIP and then the DRIPA Act? Like, how did this actually end up happening? And then you can follow it up with, how do we get out of it?
Well, lukewarm public government leadership on the issue. That's my colloquial way of putting it. Platitudes for the sake of platitudes. Look what the federal government put in the Musqueam Agreement. Are you ready for this one? UNDRIP is now the minimum standard to protect the human dignity of Indigenous peoples in Canada, including Musqueam. What? UNDRIP. So I've got news for everyone. Would everyone like to know what the global standard is to protect Indigenous rights against unilateral state action? Not UNDRIP. It's not part of the international norm or law. It's Canada, Section 35. We are actually the global leader, thanks to our Indigenous peoples, I might add. Ironically, maybe. No one talks about it. Oh, it's UNDRIP. Oh, my goodness. That's our new minimum. Shame on Canada. Shame on British Columbia. for perpetuating the myth that Canada isn't good enough on these issues. It's wrong at law, and it's not correct in fact. Think about what I just said. Legally impossible to achieve. So they put something into an agreement that they cannot meet. Can't. So how does that help reconciliation? Isn't that just another empty promise? I thought we had problems with those for the past 200 years. Anyway, what do I know? So how do we get out of it? Strong public government leadership, a vision for our province, a vision for our country that's inclusive, that we're not afraid to engage the public on, that's affordable, and that is consistent with having a robust economy if we want to keep, or actually, we now need to improve our standard of living. I mean, our standard of living in this country has slipped significantly. So that's all in the hands of public government. Don't go blaming the courts, everyone. By the way, I'm not an apologist for our courts. Yeah, there's some goofy decisions. There's some decisions I don't like. But anyone thinking this is we have all these activist courts that, it's not the big issue. You're focusing on the wrong thing. And it's not Indigenous peoples. Stop that. Yeah, there's some examples of some illegal behavior. And I do injunctive relief work, and there's legal ways of dealing with that. The single biggest issue this country has faced is public government, public government, public government. The lack of a long-term sustainable public government approach. I feel for our courts. Remember, they are dependent on the arguments that they're getting. And if you've got public governments like British Columbia that go in there with lukewarm legal arguments, not because their lawyers aren't competent, for the most part, they're competent lawyers. But if you've got instructions, you can't argue this. If you argue this, you can only go this far. Can't upset that apple cart. Don't do this. Don't do that. So then imagine you're a judge and you're expecting the best from the counsel that are appearing in front of you. And yet they have one or both hands tied behind their back in terms of what they can argue. So, the old saying, what goes in, right? You get what comes out. So this all judicial appointment processes, the fact that our justice system doesn't have enough money, blah, blah, blah. We could talk all day. Public government, but we need a vision. And we don't have it. And I'm not just blaming the current provincial government or the current federal government. This has been decades in the making. And until the electorate insists on something greater from their representatives of any of the political parties, I fear that we're not going to end up with a vision because politicians don't want to take a stance on this issue. That's the truth.
Yeah, it's hard for them to have a vision beyond, I guess, the 4-year election cycle, right?
I can't solve that one.
Yeah,
that's beyond my pay grade, as they say, right?
Is there anything that I guess I do have? I know you got to jump. So there's like the one thing I was going to ask is like, do you feel like courts will see it the same way that, like, are you hopeful that the courts will see it the same way that you've described it to me? And then is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
Well, I think it's unfair to ask our courts to solve all of our problems. I mean, former Attorney General, now Premier Eby, criticized the BC Court of Appeal for their decision on UNDRIP. And I think it's shameful. He said they were confused. They weren't confused. They could read English. And if you read BC's legislation and you read the Interpretation Act amendment that then Attorney General Eby put in place, plain English, every BC law and regulation must be construed as being consistent with UNDRIP. Now, any of your listeners that aren't lawyers, was that clear to you what I just said? Must. Oh, we got an activist court now, according to, it's awful. So I think it's unfair. I think we need to put blame where it properly lies. We need leaders with a vision that are prepared to lead. That means some tough decisions, maybe sometimes saying some tough things, but we've got to get out of this quagmire. So I think that's really, I don't know what else to say. I'm not a politician. I'm a lawyer. I believe in fairness. I believe in equity. I believe in reconciliation. But I also believe that people shouldn't be misled. We shouldn't have platitudes thrown around to make people feel warm and fuzzy when governments have no. Government of Canada can't live up to UNDRIP being a minimum standard. They literally put something into the agreement that they cannot live up to. Why would you do that in 2026 after 200 years of broken promises to Indigenous peoples? So so until we get over that, I don't know what else to say. But I appreciate you paying attention to this issue. I think we're at an existential moment in British Columbia. I don't know about the country, but I think it's clear the bridge is out. I will say that. And we either decide to slow this train down and start acting thoughtfully and prudently, or we don't. And if we don't, things can get a lot worse.
Right. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope this isn't the last interview that you do and that you're not fatigued by it, because I think the world needs to hear what you have to say about this a lot more.
I just wish our politicians could talk.
It's true. Or they'd listen.
I don't get it. I probably wouldn't make a very good politician.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, though.
Thank
and I
you.
wish you all the best.
Likewise. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye.